Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Jason sent me a note. Steve, check this out. Someone from Michigan is doing a good thing. And this article is from IJ.org, the Institute for Justice, and Andrew Weimer wrote it. And we talk about civil asset forfeiture all the time. All the time. And most people who hear about it go, that is so wrong, it shouldn't be legal. Why can't they stop it? And I've mentioned before, the courts have ruled that it's perfectly okay. But one thing that could stop it is if they passed a law against it. Now, I've mentioned that some states have passed laws making it wrong for civil asset forfeiture, or sometimes they just narrow it a little bit. But that's state by state, and the feds still do it. So the only way to stop it at the federal level would be to actually pass a law. Turns out there's now a bipartisan bill in Congress that would dramatically reform civil forfeiture laws. And yes, one of the people behind it is from Michigan. So there you go. Institute for Justice praises the reintroduction of the enhanced Fifth Amendment Integrity Restoration Act, or the FAIR Act. Today, just a couple days ago, Tim Walberg from Michigan and Jamie Raskin from Maryland reintroduced an enhanced version of the Fifth Amendment Integrity Restoration Act, H.R. 1525, which would enact a sweeping overhaul of federal civil forfeiture laws. The bill would remove the profit incentive that drives so many federal forfeitures. It would end the federal equitable sharing program that is used to circumvent state law protections and eliminate the unfair administrative forfeiture process altogether. The new FAIR Act takes an even stronger stand against abusive forfeitures than in the past by ending administrative forfeitures, says IJ Senior Attorney Dan Albin, who heads IJ's national initiative to end forfeiture abuse. Protecting Americans' property rights isn't a partisan issue, and we're glad to see lawmakers from across the aisle working together to pass true reforms. So it's a bipartisan effort so far, but they've tried this before. The question is, do we have enough to push it through now, or is it just take more time? The FAIR Act would enact the following changes to federal civil forfeiture. It would ensure forfeiture victims fair access to courts. Currently, up to 98.6% of property seized by federal agencies is forfeited by bureaucrats in administrative agencies outside the courts. The FAIR Act eliminates administrative forfeiture, ensuring that only federal courts, not agencies, can order civil forfeitures to the federal government. FAIR Act further provides for access to counsel for those seeking return of their property. So the one reason many people don't fight these is they can't afford it. And they're saying this act would allow you to have an attorney paid for by the government to fight the case. And that would remove the biggest hurdle to most people on this. It would end the profit incentive by sending federal forfeiture funds to the U.S. Treasury. Today, proceeds from civil forfeitures go to the DOJ or the Treasury Forfeiture Fund and are spent outside of the congressional appropriations process, so federal agents have an economic incentive to pursue forfeitures to grow funding for their agencies. The FAIR Act ends that incentive by sending proceeds from all forfeiture directly to the U.S. Treasury's general fund. And so if the agency that's forfeiting the money doesn't get to keep it, they're not going to be incentivized to take it. It prevents evasion of state forfeiture laws because the FAIR Act ends the equitable sharing program. We talked about this before. A state agency grabs something. When they're about to get sued, they hand it to the feds and go, here, you guys deal with this. The feds then take it and say, oh, thank you very much. You know something, we'll give you a finder's fee, and they kick it back to them. So when you sue the state agency, they go, well, we haven't got the money anymore. We gave it to the feds. And any money we got back came from the feds. You got to deal with the feds, even though it was taken by the state. So by ending equitable sharing, it would prevent the federal government from paying state and local enforcement to evade the more restrictive civil forfeiture laws that some state legislatures have passed, attempting to protect their citizens' property rights. It places the appropriate burden of proof on the government. The FAIR Act places the burden on the federal government to prove, based on clear and convincing evidence, that a property owner knew or should have known that the property was being used in relation to criminal activity. Under current law, the government need only show it is more likely than not that the property is connected to a crime. And as pointed out before, when you file the action, they make you prove it, not the state or the feds. It also protects innocent owners from forfeiture. Innocent owners of property used by another person in relation to a crime will be able to recover their seized property by showing they did all that they reasonably could to protect against any unlawful use by that third party. The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld state laws where somebody borrows something from somebody else, doesn't tell them what they're going to do with it, they go out and they commit a crime with it, and the feds seize that thing. So imagine, for instance, you borrowed a car from somebody. You know somebody, you borrow their car. You go commit a crime with it, the car gets seized. And the car owner who's innocent steps up and goes, "That's my car." Well, it was used in the commission of a crime. It's being forfeited. I didn't know, I had no way of knowing. Doesn't matter, it was used in the commission of a crime. And the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld that. So, earlier this week, the IJ filed a new lawsuit against the FBI. I talked about this over its attempt to forfeit a woman's savings. She's not been charged with a crime, but her $40,000 in cash were seized as part of that FBI raid on the safe deposit boxes out there in California because she had rented a box there. Her case illustrates how the Fair Acts reforms could protect innocent property owners. Months after the raid on the box company, she received a notice from the FBI telling her that her money was subject to forfeiture. But the notice didn't say what she did wrong and contained no allegations of wrongdoing. So she tried to read through the boilerplate language and submitted a petition for remission. But it turns out that if you do that, you're conceding that your money is subject to forfeit, but you wouldn't know that by reading the notice because it was just dense legalese. So she was leaving it completely in the hands of the FBI, which of course is the same agency who would profit from denying her a request, and they are going to decide whether to return any of her savings. So the Institute for Justice filed a lawsuit on her behalf and on behalf of others similarly situated in a class action. Institute for Justice advocates to end forfeiture through litigation, strategic research, and legislation. And that's one of these things. You can fight these cases on a case-by-case basis, but there's always going to be more. And really, we want it to stop. The IJ has class action lawsuits aimed at stopping suspicionless seizures of cash at airports, roadside seizures on highways, and a city program that takes cars from innocent owners. IJ's landmark study looking at state and federal forfeiture, policing for profit, is now in its third edition. IJ's advocacy has led to Maine, Nebraska, and New Mexico ending civil forfeiture and replacing with criminal forfeiture. 3 states, 47 to go, and the feds. And by the way, most people, when they think about the distinction, go civil asset forfeiture versus criminal asset forfeiture. Criminal asset forfeiture means that if you get arrested for a crime and you are convicted of a crime, any proceeds of that crime would be subject to forfeit, which makes sense. Civil asset forfeiture means that they encounter you, they do not charge you with a crime, but they take your stuff and go, "You want it back, sue us." Sue us. It's not even a criminal action. Sue us. That's why it's civil asset forfeiture. And there's no logical reason why that makes sense, but they've just been doing it for so long that it's now become almost like a tradition. It's just something the government's always done. So this bill, which is the Fifth Amendment Integrity Restoration Act, and the Fifth Amendment here is reference to due process, that your property cannot be taken without due process, is H.R. 1525, and it was brought up by Representative Tim Walberg and Representative Jamie Raskin. And so they're both, opposite sides of the aisle. And the key here is to see if we can get enough people behind this. The problem, of course, is that there are huge interests that want to keep this going. And it's all those government agencies that profit. And of course, they would be cut out of the system if this bill passes, which was the profit incentive by sending federal forfeiture funds to the U.S. Treasury instead of letting the department that seized the money keep it. Because that, of course, does incentivize them to go out and look for more money, because the agency that finds it, finders keepers. So there you go. It's a good thing, but I got to remind you, as I always do, the Institute for Justice is a nonprofit organization that does a lot of the fights that we want to see take place. but that most people couldn't afford to engage in. And so they live off of donations. And if you're so inclined, after hearing stories about all the good work they're doing, please visit their website, poke around, see what they do. And if you're moved to do so, please donate to them and support them, because they are doing work that, like I said, other people can't afford to do or aren't inclined to do, because it's, as you can imagine, a very, very difficult slog to fight the FBI or to fight the Department of Justice. And you and I don't have the resources, but the Institute for Justice does, because people support them. So please visit them, and I'll put their link in the description below. Otherwise, Jason sent me the article. Andrew Weimer wrote that, and he, of course, does work for the Institute for Justice. Bipartisan bill in Congress would dramatically reform civil forfeiture laws if only we can get it passed. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. When somebody told me I was delusional, I almost fell off my unicorn.